There was a man named Fielder who possessed a strange peculiarity. No matter what trouble happened in his life, Mr. Fielder never became upset. A neighbor once asked the man how he managed to remain completely calm in the face of adversity. Mr. Fielder laughed softly and asked in reply, "How does a neighbor know if he has been in trouble or lucky?" "But it's immediately clear," the neighbor exclaimed in surprise. "If I'm happy about what happened, it's luck. If I'm sad, it's trouble." Mr. Fielder shook his head and shared a few stories about himself. One day, Mr. Fielder had been driving recklessly. He had run red lights, driven well over the speed limit, and had done everything in his power to avoid being caught. Back then, he had deemed his behavior as small compared to the business he was in a hurry to attend. However, Mr. Fielder was stopped by a patrol officer and issued a huge fine. After receiving numerous citations, a clearly agitated Mr. Fielder got back behind the wheel and drove. He was angry at the police officers, at himself, and at his fate. But just as Mr. Fielder turned the corner, he came across an accident he would surely have been in if he hadn't been stopped. Another time, Mr. Fielder had been playing golf and had accidentally thrown his favorite club into some nearby thorny bushes. As he was struggling through the thicket, the man cursed at the top of his lungs about the bushes, the club, and the golf club. Several times, the thorns lashed back at him, and several more times he lost his cool. However, when Mr. Fielder spotted the lost club, he noticed a gold cigarette case laying next to it. Since the owner could not be identified, the man kept the find. And yet another, Mr. Fielder had dinner in a cafe and ordered his favorite pastry. It was late in the evening. Near closing, the cafe only had one slice of cake left. But fate would have it that another customer had beat old Mr. Fielder to it. A clearly annoyed Mr. Fielder returned to his table and began to stir his coffee. Suddenly, a pleasant woman sat down with a cup of tea and a saucer with the last slice of cake in her hands. Seeing how disappointed Mr. Fielder was by the loss of his sweet, the woman offered to split it into two. The two talked for almost an hour and grew fond of one another, and agreed to meet again, but for a date. On the day of the date, Mr. Fielder left his house, suited in a newly bought, top-of-the-line attire, perfectly combed hair, and a bouquet of flowers in hand. As he made his way toward his car, however, another passing automobile drove over a putty muddle, splashing old Mr. Fielder. Almost crying with grief, the man returned to change his clothes, and found that he had forgotten to turn off the iron. The cloth left under it had already caught fire, and if he hadn't returned inside, he would have lost his home. And the woman waiting in the cafe was not offended at all. You could say she was even amused when Mr. Fielder described his misadventures. Circumstances had taught old Mr. Fielder that getting angry is never worth it. Experience had taught him that life is so very complex that a seeming loss can always lead to victory. If trouble stumbles upon you, don't be in a hurry to curse fate. It is possible that she prepared for you something fantastic.